My daughter-in-law kicked me out of my home after my son died, saying, "This is no longer a place for old memories." My name is Maria. I am over 70, and my entire life has been dedicated to needles, threads, and the lace patterns of this small fishing village. All my love, all my pride, I poured into Tiago, my only son. I once believed he would be the one to carry on our family's legacy, something I had cherished my whole life. But then, he left too soon. And from that day, I knew I hadn't just lost my son. I was also about to lose everything that was inextricably linked to my very being. I still vividly remember the day we laid Tiago to rest. The village's small cemetery was packed, everyone dressed in black, eyes red-rimmed. I stood in silence, watching the fresh white flowers placed on my son's grave. But I knew they weren't just there to mourn Tiago. They were there to mourn the hope of this village. Everyone knew about the big contract Tiago had pursued during the last year of his life. A deal with a fashion conglomerate in Paris, seen as the lifeline for our slowly fading village. It promised jobs. It promised a future. And now, the only person who understood all the details of that contract lay silently beneath the earth. And Sophia, my daughter-in-law, knew how to seize that despair. She stood before the crowd, not as a devastated widow, but as a leader. She spoke of her humble beginnings, of how Tiago had been the light of her life, and then she skillfully transitioned to their shared dream. Tiago didn't live to see the day this contract would save our village. Her voice choked, full of drama. But I won't let his dream die. I will complete it, for him, and for everyone here. That eulogy wasn't a farewell. It was an inauguration speech. The entire village didn't just weep. They nodded. In their eyes, Sophia wasn't just a grieving widow. She had become the successor, the only one who could save their future. So, when Mr. Costa, the village elder, approached after the ceremony, he walked right past me, Tiago's mother, without a word of comfort, and went straight to Sophia to shake her hand. "Don't worry," he said. "The whole village will support you wholeheartedly." The other villagers also gathered around her, whispering about job opportunities. They had their new hero. And I, who had taught Tiago his very first stitch, had become a relic of the past. A past that needed to be swept aside to make way for the future. I stood there, silently, and I knew something was wrong. Sophia's performance was too perfect, and perfect performances often hide the darkest secrets. A few days after the funeral, Sophia approached me privately. She no longer had the strong demeanor of that day. She sat opposite me in the living room, her eyes red-rimmed, her face full of sorrow. "Mother," she said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I have something to tell you." She explained that she had just discovered Tiago had left behind a huge debt from his final art projects. "If we don't get that big contract with the fashion conglomerate," she sobbed, "the bank will repossess everything. This house, the workshop. I'm doing all of this, just trying to preserve his legacy." It was a perfectly calculated lie. It played on my love for my son, on my desire to protect what remained of him. It left me powerless to resist. How could I oppose someone who was trying to save my own son's legacy? "You need a quiet place to rest after this shock," she continued, her voice full of concern. "I've rented a small room for you in the next town. Please go and stay there for a while. I'll take care of everything here." She wasn't kicking me out. She was taking care of me. A sentence disguised as kindness. That day, as I packed a few personal items into a small bag, I walked past Tiago's embroidery frame. On it, a pristine white lace piece was half finished, an incredibly intricate pattern I had never seen before. I instinctively reached out and touched the soft threads. A memory suddenly flooded back, as clear as yesterday. A few weeks prior, Tiago had sat in this very spot, meticulously working with each needle and thread. He looked up at me, his eyes bright with pride. "This piece is very special, Mother," he had said. "One day, you will find my secret hidden within it." At the time, I just smiled, thinking it was merely the fanciful words of an artist. But now, looking at the unfinished lace, those words echoed in my mind, sowing a vague sense of unease. "What secret?" I sighed, dismissing the thought. The pain of losing my son was too great. I no longer had the strength to search for secrets. I quietly left the house, leaving behind the unfinished lace and my son's last words. I moved into an old fishing shack on the edge of the village, where my husband used to store his nets. The smell of dried fish and sea salt was strong. The isolation here was heavier than the loneliness in my own house. The entire village, enchanted by Sophia's promises, had shunned me. They saw me as a difficult old woman, an obstacle on their path to a bright future. Every night, I couldn't sleep. Tiago's image flickered in my mind, and then illogical fragments began to surface, haunting me. I remembered that just days after Tiago died, Sophia had hastily repainted the entire wooden staircase leading to the attic in the workshop. "To make it fresher, mother," she had said. But that staircase was still very new. The isolation in the old fishing shack was heavier than the loneliness in my own house. The entire village, enchanted by Sophia's promises, had shunned me. The smell of dried fish and sea salt was strong, and every night, the sound of waves crashing against the rocky shore outside seemed to whisper Tiago's name. I couldn't sleep. My son's image flickered in my mind. And then, during those sleepless nights, illogical fragments began to surface, haunting me. I remembered that just days after Tiago died, Sophia had hastily repainted the entire wooden staircase leading to the attic in the workshop. "To make it fresher, mother," she had said, a sweet smile on her lips. But that staircase was still very new, the wood still fragrant with pine resin. Why repaint it? I also remembered a long, strange scratch on her arm, on the very day of the accident. It ran from her wrist almost to her elbow, red and deep. When I worriedly asked, she evaded, explaining it was from rushing to clean up and getting scraped by a table edge. But it wasn't a scrape. It looked like a claw mark, a sign of a struggle. Those disjointed, meaningless fragments then, now resurfaced, sowing a terrible suspicion in my heart. To seek a little comfort, a final connection with my son, I opened the old wooden box I had brought with me. The box was full of Tiago's small keepsakes. Wooden bobbins, spools of coloured thread, and a special bobbin he had carved and given to me on his last birthday, telling me it was my secret. I picked up that bobbin, turning it in my hand, feeling each familiar carved line, and then I noticed something. It was lighter than usual. Inside the hollow core of the bobbin, something was tucked in, a soft mass. My hands trembling, I carefully used a small needle to coax it out. It was a small, unfinished piece of white lace. I recognized it immediately. It was the very piece I had seen on Tiago's embroidery frame the day I left home. That intricate pattern. His words, "One day, you will find my secret hidden within it." Sophia, in her haste to clean up and erase Tiago's traces, must have discarded it. But perhaps, by some twist of fate, she had accidentally put it into this very keepsake box. My son's secret. It was in my hands. That night, under the flickering oil lamp in the fishing shack, I did not cry. I spread the unfinished lace on the table. I took out my knitting needles, the needles that had accompanied me through an entire lifetime. I would finish my son's last work. My old, calloused hands began to follow each thread. As I continued his stitches, I could feel everything. The stitches were no longer even. They were hurried, tight. I could feel his panic through each knot, his haste as he tried to leave a final message. This was no longer just lace-making. This was a dialogue with the deceased. I was reading a suicide letter written in thread. "Mother, I'm scared." Each knot seemed to whisper to me, "Mother, I know the truth." I worked tirelessly, losing track of days and nights. Each stitch was a tear, each thread a prayer. After many nights, the final piece was completed. My hands trembled as I held the lace up to the lamp. Now, the seemingly meaningless lines, those intricate patterns, suddenly revealed a message. My son, a gifted artist, had not written the truth. He had embroidered the truth. Subtly woven into the ancient floral motifs were four letters formed from distinct stitches, recognizable only to a true artisan. The lace fell from my hands. I sank to the cold floor. All my strength seemed to drain away. The pain of losing my son, the pain I had tried to suppress, now mingled with the horror of an undeniable truth. My daughter-in-law, the one the entire village was hailing as a hero. She was the one who had killed my son. The next morning, the pain had transformed into a cold determination. I carefully wrapped the lace in a linen cloth and went straight to the town's police station. I requested to speak directly with Inspector Costa, an elderly, soon-to-retire man who had handled Tiago's case. Initially, he seemed very impatient. "Mrs. Maria," he said, his voice a little weary, "I understand your pain, but the case has been closed. It was an accident. You shouldn't let grief make you paranoid." I said nothing. I just silently spread the pristine white lace on his desk. Silence filled the room. Inspector Costa leaned down to look. He, like me, was from this village. He had grown up with the art of lace-making. The eyes of an old policeman who had seen everything narrowed. He saw it. The name, Sophia, intricately embroidered, appeared like a silent accusation. The weariness on his face vanished, replaced by professionalism and a sharp gaze. "Tell me," he said, his voice lowered. "Exactly where did you find this?" After hearing my story, he simply nodded. "All right, Mrs. Maria. I will secretly reinvestigate the scene. You must remain silent. Don't tell anyone." The contract signing ceremony took place a week later, in the village's main square. It was a big event. The entire village was present. Press from Lisbon also arrived. Sophia was the center of attention. She wore a pristine white dress, standing on the podium, flanked by the fashion conglomerate's directors. She looked radiant, perfect, a strong young widow, a hero about to bring prosperity to an entire rural area. I stood in a hidden corner of the crowd, watching her smile for the cameras. She was at the pinnacle of glory, ready to sign the contract that would not only bring her wealth, but also eternally bury her crime under the spotlight of success. But she didn't know that the net had been cast. Just as Sophia took the expensive Mont Blanc pen, just as its tip was about to touch the multi-million-dollar contract, I stepped out from the crowd. "Wait," my voice rang out. It wasn't loud, but in the solemn silence of the square, it was clear and sharp as breaking glass. All activity stopped. The fashion conglomerate directors looked up in surprise. Camera lenses snapped towards me, and the entire village, all of them, stared at the old woman in the worn black dress standing alone in the wide square. Sophia turned. When she saw me, I saw her radiant smile freeze for a moment, but only a second later, she was a masterful actress. Her expression immediately changed, becoming full of sorrow and resignation. She instantly played the victim, a role she had performed very successfully. "Oh, mother," she said, her voice full of sympathy, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I know you are in so much pain. I know you still haven't accepted the truth, but you can't keep making things up. Please, don't ruin this happy day for the whole village, Tiago's happy day." She turned to the crowd, her eyes teary, a perfect image of nobility. "Don't you see? My mother, after Tiago's death, she's no longer lucid. She needs to rest." The villagers began to murmur. I could hear whispers. "Poor woman. Such a shock. Sophia is truly pitiful." They looked at me with pity, as if I were a crazy, pathetic old woman ruining everything. Sophia, seeing that she had completely gained the upper hand, decided to end this drama spectacularly. She marched straight towards me, reaching out to snatch the lace I held tightly in my hand. "Let me show everyone this absurdity," she yelled, her voice full of conviction. "Let me prove to everyone that my mother is obsessed with meaningless things." She yanked the lace from my hand, and to prove it was just a meaningless piece of fabric, she tore it in half. A dry rip echoed, but that action tragically backfired. Her tear, in her haste and anger, accidentally followed the exact outline of the intricate patterns. It separated all the elaborate surrounding floral motifs, leaving only a narrow strip of lace in the middle. The excess lace pieces fluttered down onto the stone pavement, and on that strip of lace, clearer and more prominent than ever before, were 4 letters embroidered with a different kind of thread. S, U, F, E, E. The entire square held its breath. The murmuring ceased. That name, naked and undeniable, hung in the air like a confession. Just then, Inspector Costa, who had been blended in with the crowd, stepped forward. Behind him were 2 police officers. Your actions have condemned you, Miss Sophia, he said, his voice sharp. You have helped us highlight the evidence. He paused, then held up a small sealed bag. Inside was a shiny piece of metal. And we also just found this, he said, his voice echoing across the square. A broken earring, carefully hidden under a fresh coat of paint on the staircase in your husband's workshop. It perfectly matches the other one in your jewelry box. Sophia's face turned pale. All her escape routes were cut off. The play had truly ended. A police officer stepped forward and handcuffed Sophia. She did not resist, did not scream. She just stood there, trembling, staring at the strip of lace with her name on the ground. The entire square was stunned, then ashamed. I could see it on everyone's faces. On the face of Mr. Costa, the village elder. On the faces of the neighbours who had shunned me. They had not only been deceived, they had become accomplices in silence. They had blindly believed a murderer, had turned their backs on a truly grieving mother. A heavy sense of guilt permeated the air. A few months later, Sophia was convicted. Justice, as the law defines it, was served. I reclaimed my son's lace workshop, where his spirit still lingered in every spool of thread. But the cheerful, creative atmosphere of old was gone. Only a heavy silence remained. The entire village, after the shock, also sank into a silent remorse. I sat there, every day, amidst the spools of thread and unfinished embroidery frames, next to my 2 young grandchildren, Tiago's children. They were still too innocent to fully understand the tragedy that had befallen their family. They only knew that their mother was gone, and their father would never return. I tried to find peace in teaching them their first stitches, but the haunting memories remained. One morning, the postman brought a letter. It was sent from prison. I opened it, my hand trembling slightly. Inside was not an apology, nor a single line of remorse. Only a single sentence, written in Sophia's scrawling, hateful handwriting, deeply etched onto the paper. You won, this time. I stared at that sentence. It was not an admission of guilt. It was a challenge, a threat, a promise that her hatred would not die behind bars. I folded the letter, looking out the window. Justice had been served. But I suddenly realized that my battle, the battle to protect my legacy and my family, might not truly be over yet. Sophia's letter lingered in my mind, like a ghost for many days, making me lose sleep. But then, one morning, seeing my 2 grandchildren trying to imitate my stitches, I made a decision. I would not let her hatred continue to poison my life, or my grandchildren's lives. I had fought not to live in fear. I had fought to reclaim the truth. And I decided that Tiago's true legacy was not a contract or money, but the art of lace-making itself, its creativity and beauty. The next day, I began to reopen the workshop in earnest. Initially, it was just me and my 2 young grandchildren. I patiently taught them their first stitches, just as I had taught their father many years ago. Their clear laughter began to dispel the silence of the lace workshop. Gradually, the women of the village began to come. At first, just a few, coming not only to learn the craft, but also to offer an apology. They brought bread, fresh fish, and stories. They sat, knitting lace with me, and the guilty silence of old was gradually replaced by connecting threads. Good news spread. Our lace workshop was not just a workplace. It became a community centre, a place where women could come to learn, share, and find autonomy. We didn't need any big contract. We created our own works, selling them to tourists who appreciated true art. A year later, on the anniversary of Tiago's death, the entire village gathered in the square again. But this time there were no false speeches. Instead, there was an outdoor lace exhibition. The most beautiful pieces created by the women of the village themselves hung, fluttering in the sea breeze. I stood there, amidst the works of art, beside my 2 grandchildren. I was no longer a symbol of the past. I had become a part of the future, a future woven not by empty promises but by our own hands and hearts. Sophia is still in prison. Perhaps one day she will get out. But I am no longer afraid, because I know I am not alone. I have an entire village standing behind me, and that is a fortress that no hatred can penetrate. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.